Welcome to the Deep Dives. Today, we're plunging into some source material that really asks a fundamental question about the power of your own mind.
Yeah, we've got excerpts from a pretty well-known book, Think and Grow Rich, and we're focusing specifically on Chapter 4.
Our mission, really, is to unpack the core ideas presented here. Concepts like faith, autosuggestion, the subconscious mind.
And something the author actually terms infinite intelligence. We're going to look at how this material frames these as, well, tools you might use to consciously shape your life.
Right, tools to move toward your goal.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The source basically argues that understanding these concepts is key. Key to realizing our thoughts might be way more powerful than we usually give them credit for.
Let's dive into the terms first because, the author uses them in very specific ways. It's important.
Absolutely, because they might mean something a little different than your everyday understanding.
Totally. The text starts by defining some foundational terms, and yet grasping the author's particular meaning is crucial.
Right, like faith. When I hear that word, my first thought is usually, religious belief. But that doesn't seem to be what the author is getting at here. Not really.
Precisely. In this context, faith is defined as having confidence, trust, and an absolute, unwavering belief that you can do something. That's the key.
Unwavering belief.
And the text really emphasizes this isn't just like surface-level hope. This belief has to be true on a subconscious level.
So it's not enough to just say you believe it. It has to feel like fundamentally true deep down.
Exactly. The text says if there's a nagging doubt or, if you're simply going through the motions, it just won't work.
Why not?
Because the subconscious mind, according to this material, it perceives that lack of genuine conviction. You need absolute total confidence to be convinced without question.
Okay, that distinction makes sense. It's about that deep internal certainty, not just wishing for something or agreeing intellectually.
Got it.
What about this idea of infinite intelligence? That also sounds like it could be, interpreted in a few ways.
Yeah, the author uses this term to identify a part of the human mind, or maybe its processes, that generates things like hunches, flashes of insight, and leaps of logic.
Intuition.
Sort of. It's presented as a source of creativity or intuition that goes beyond just linear conscious thought. The editor actually notes similarities here to Carl Jung's collective unconscious, or, in more modern language, being in a flow state or the zone.
Okay, so it's about tapping into that deeper well of intuition or creative ideas. Something that feels like it comes through you, not just from your conscious reasoning.
That's a good way to put it, based on the text, yeah. And then, of course, there's the subconscious mind itself. The source describes it in a way that seems to align pretty closely with Carl Jung's perspective again.
So how does this view of the subconscious differ from our normal, everyday conscious thinking?
Well, your conscious mind, it takes in information through your senses, right? It filters, it reasons, it plans things out. But the subconscious mind, according to this source, it has access to all that same information. Everything that has ever reached your conscious mind.
Whoa, so it retains everything.
It does, according to the text. And here's the really crucial part. It doesn't reason like your conscious mind does. It doesn't make value judgments.
No judgments?
No, it takes everything literally and does not forget. It just accepts whatever input it receives.
That's a powerful idea, and kind of unnerving if it just accepts anything without judging it.
It is.
So how do you actually interact with it then? Or influence this part of the mind if it doesn't reason like we do?
Yeah.
Can you just, tell it what to do directly?
Well, the text suggests you can't command it directly, not like you command your hand to pick up a cup or something.
Okay.
However, it does say that forgotten facts and ideas that are always there in your subconscious can, if they are firmly rooted, influence your conscious attitudes and actions.
So the deeply rooted stuff bubbles up and affects us consciously.
Exactly, and that's where the connection to cultivating faith becomes so essential in this framework.
Okay, right. Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The source doesn't just say you need faith. It claims faith is a state of mind that may be induced or created. You can actually build it.
Precisely, you can develop it. And the method described is through affirmation or repeated instructions to the subconscious mind through the principle of autosuggestion.
Autosuggestion. So that's the how. That's how you develop this specific kind of faith.
According to this material, yes. repeating affirmations or specific thoughts, specific impulses. It's described like giving orders to your subconscious mind.
Giving orders.
Yeah, the text is pretty direct about it. It calls this the only known method of voluntary development of the emotion of faith.
Wow. Okay. It feels a bit like you're training it, teaching it what to believe on that deep level. And the source really stresses the role of emotion in this whole process.
It absolutely does. The emotions, what the text calls the feeling portion of thoughts, that's what gives thoughts their vitality, life, and action. Thoughts aren't just cold, bare facts. They carry energy based on how they feel.
And certain emotions are like rocket fuel for this process.
That's a good analogy. The text specifically mentions the emotions of faith, love, and sex, stating that when these are mixed with any thought impulse, they give it even greater action, more power.
And the really extraordinary claim here is that any thought, when it's emotionalized like that and mixed with deep faith, that absolute unwavering belief in your ability, it will begin immediately to translate themselves into their physical equivalent or counterpart.
It suggests your dominant emotionalized thoughts actually start to manifest in your reality. That is the central mechanism the source describes.
That's huge.
It is, but there's a critical caveat here, and it's a really significant one. This process, it works just as readily for negative thoughts as it does for positive ones. The subconscious mind will translate into its physical equivalent a thought impulse of a negative or destructive nature just as readily.
Wait, so it doesn't filter for good or bad. It just takes whatever emotionalized input you give it.
Exactly. No filter. The text actually uses a quote from a noted criminologist to illustrate this point.
How so?
It says, people exposed to crime, they first abhor it, right? Then over time, they become accustomed to it and endure it. And eventually, if the contact is prolonged enough, they embrace it and become influenced by it.
Wow.
This gradual shift is presented as a demonstration of how a negative thought impulse, when it's repeatedly passed on to the subconscious mind often enough, is finally accepted and acted upon.
That's a really stark illustration. It shows how repeated negative exposure, just like a repeated negative thought, can become deeply ingrained and actually influence your behavior. And the source ties this directly to the idea of bad luck, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. The text argues that millions of people believe they're doomed to poverty and failure simply because of bad luck, feeling like they have no control over it.
Right, like it's some external force.
But the author contends they are, in fact, the creators of their own misfortunes.
Wow. What?
Because this negative belief in bad luck is picked up by the subconscious mind and translated into its physical equivalent.
So the belief in bad luck is what actually generates it. That turns the whole conventional idea of luck completely on its head.
It really does. It suggests that your internal state, your belief or faith or your lack of it, is the element that will determine the action of your subconscious mind.
So the call to action here is basically pass any desire, anything you want, to your subconscious. But do it in a state of expectancy or belief that the transmutation will actually take place. You have to expect it to work.
Expectancy and belief, that's key.
Which leads us to this fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling point you mentioned, the magic and danger of self-suggestion. Because the subconscious takes things literally and doesn't judge if something is true or false.
Yes, the text is very explicit about this. It says, there is nothing to stop you from deceiving your subconscious mind when giving it instructions through autosuggestion. You can literally program it with a desired state, even if it isn't your current reality.
Deceiving it.
Yeah.
Wow. And to make this deception, or maybe intentional programming is a better word, more effective, the text advises that when you're addressing your subconscious, you must conduct yourself just as you would if you were already in possession of the material thing that you are demanding.
Act as if.
Act as if you already have it.
Right. And the editor's comments mention how this actually aligns pretty well with the contemporary motivation theory axiom. The subconscious cannot distinguish between what is real and what is vividly imagined.
Which is why that basketball study they mentioned is such a compelling example.
It really is, yeah. You had those three groups, remember. One group physically practiced shooting free throws. One group just rested.
And the third?
The third group only visualized practicing, vividly imagined it. And the results showed that the visualization group improved their ability almost equal to those who had practiced daily.
Almost equal. Just from visualizing.
Just from visualizing. Yeah. It's strong support for the idea that intense mental rehearsal, which is a form of self-suggestion, can significantly influence real-world results.
The key word, again and again, seems to be convincingly. You have to do it convincingly.
Absolutely. If you have that nagging doubt while you're trying to plant an idea or instruction in your subconscious, it'll pick up on that. It detects the lack of conviction.
And then what happens?
You end up sending mixed messages that cancel each other out, which is why doing it with faith, with that deep conviction and lack of doubt, is stressed so heavily throughout this chapter.
Okay, so the subconscious doesn't evaluate truth or falsehood, positive or negative, but it does respond powerfully to the intensity of the input, how emotionalized the thought is.
Exactly, which is why the text really emphasizes cultivating positive emotions as the dominating forces of your mind. And faith, as we discussed earlier, is a state of mind that you can create by autosuggestion.
It almost reframes those traditional ideas of faith, doesn't it? Like, the author suggests religious leaders often told people to have faith, but maybe didn't provide a practical method for actually developing it.
Right, and this text proposes that the method is precisely through self-suggestion.
The source describes faith in these really powerful, almost alchemical terms. It's called the eternal elixir that gives life, power, and action to the impulse of thought.
Yeah, and it's listed as the starting point of all accumulation of riches, the basis of all miracles, the antidote for failure,
Right.
the means to communicate with infinite intelligence, and the only way to actually harness that force, that's a truly transformative power being attributed to it. It is, and it kind of boils down to a simple, maybe even slightly uncomfortable truth the text states very plainly. It is a fact that you will come to believe whatever you repeat to yourself, whether the statement is true or false.
So if you repeatedly tell yourself a lie,
You will eventually accept it as truth. Your subconscious accepts it.
which leads directly to that profound statement that you are what you are because of the dominating thoughts that you permit to occupy your mind.
The thoughts you deliberately choose to cultivate, the ones you strengthen with emotion, they constitute the motivating forces that direct and control your every movement, act, and deed. They drive everything.
And thoughts mixed with emotion become like a magnetic force attracting other similar thoughts.
That's the analogy. It's compared to planting a seed that germinates, grows, and multiplies.
So a single emotionalized thought, if you nurture it, it starts attracting related thoughts, and it grows in power until it becomes a primary driver of your behavior, your actions, your outcomes. The crucial question then is, how do you make sure you plant the right original seed? The idea, the plan, the purpose you actually want to grow.
Through repetition of thought. That's the answer given. This is why the source material gives that really concrete instruction. Write out your major purpose or definite chief aim, memorize it, and then repeat it out loud daily.
Repeat it out loud. Why out loud?
The text says, until these vibrations of sound have reached your subconscious mind. It implies the auditory repetition adds another layer of reinforcement.
Okay. So it's a deliberate act of programming, really, designed to make your desired outcome your dominant thought pattern.
Exactly. And the text suggests you can actively throw off any bad influences and essentially build your own life the way you want it to be just by consciously changing those dominating thoughts.
Like overcoming a lack of self-confidence, which the text presents as a sort of perfect use case for autosuggestion.
Which brings us directly to a practical application provided right there in the source material, a self-confidence formula. This isn't just abstract theory. It's laid out as a proposed set of daily actions designed to implement these principles.
Okay, let's break down the steps of this formula because it really shows how to put this maybe abstract-sounding idea into actual practice.
All right. Step 1 involves a declaration of your belief in your ability to achieve your definite purpose. And it's coupled with a demand from yourself for persistent, continuous action, and then a promise to actually take that action.
So it's stating your conviction and your commitment to act.
Yes. Then, step 2 acknowledges the power of those dominating thoughts to become reality. It instructs you to dedicate 30 minutes every day to concentrating your thoughts on visualizing the person you intend to become, really creating a clear mental picture in your mind.
Daily visualization. Got it.
Step 3 directly uses the principle of autosuggestion. Knowing it works, or at least proceeding as if it works, you devote 10 minutes daily specifically to demanding the development of self-confidence through this repetition method.
Okay, demanding self-confidence for 10 minutes. And step 4.
Step 4 connects back to having that written chief aim, that major purpose. You commit to having it written down, referring to it, and basically never stopping until you've developed sufficient self-confidence to actually achieve it. Persistence.
Right. And the 5th step seems different. It adds this essential ethical layer, doesn't it?
It really does. It states that any lasting wealth or position must be built on truth and justice. It talks about engaging in transactions that benefit all, not just yourself.
Benefit all.
Yeah. It's about attracting cooperation from others. And it says you persuade others by showing your willingness to help them. And it also includes actively eliminating negative emotions. It lists hatred, envy, jealousy, selfishness, cynicism.
How do you eliminate those?
By consciously developing love for all humanity, because those negative states, the text says flat out, can never bring me success. This step concludes by stating, you will cause others to believe in you because you will believe in them and in myself. It links your belief in others to their belief in you.
That's quite comprehensive. So the formula suggests signing this whole thing, memorizing it, and repeating it aloud daily with full faith.
Right. The idea is that this consistent repetition, when mixed with emotion and that unwavering belief, will gradually influence your conscious thoughts and actions, ultimately leading to self-reliance and success as defined by your goal.
And the text describes this formula as a proven technique that will work for your success if it is used constructively. Right. But then it immediately follows with that crucial warning again.
On the other hand, if used destructively, it will destroy just as readily.
So the mechanism itself is totally neutral, like a tool. It's the input, the intention that determines the outcome.
Precisely. This just underscores the disaster of negative thinking that the text warns about. The subconscious makes no distinction between constructive and destructive thought impulses.
It just acts on whatever is dominant and emotionalized.
Exactly. It will translate into reality a thought impulse driven by fear just as readily as it will translate into reality a thought driven by courage or faith. Same process, different input, vastly different result.
It's like that analogy you mentioned earlier, like a powerful force, maybe like electricity. You can use it for incredible creation or for devastating destruction.
Yeah.
It all depends on how you direct it.
That's the exact analogy the text uses, yeah.
Yeah.
The law of autosuggestion will lead you to peace and prosperity or down into the valley of misery, failure, and death. It entirely depends, according to this source, on your understanding and, critically, how you apply it.
So if you just allow your mind to be filled with fear or doubt, if you do not believe in your ability to achieve something or maybe to connect with that infinite intelligence,
then the law of autosuggestion takes that lack of belief, that very doubt, and uses it as a pattern by which your subconscious mind will translate it into its physical equivalent. It actively works to bring your doubt into reality.
that's sobering. It means passively accepting doubt is actually an active process of creating negative outcomes.
According to this view, yes. But the editor's comments add a helpful point here on the flip side. When you do manage to cultivate that faith in your ability, it doesn't just plant the positive ideas you want. It actually works to reinforce itself. That faith reduces the resistance in your conscious mind, making you more open and receptive to those creative ideas coming from the subconscious or that infinite intelligence.
So it creates a kind of positive feedback loop.
Exactly.
The more you believe, the more open you are to the ideas that will help you succeed, and then the more you see results, which makes it easier to believe even more strongly the next time. It builds momentum.
Perfectly put. It builds momentum. The text then sort of poses the question directly to you, the reader or the listener, will this stuff actually work for you?
And the answer it gives
is that you won't really know unless you relax your resistance and just have faith that it will. It basically says you have to take that leap and apply the principle to find out.
It requires action based on faith first. Like the wind you mentioned, carrying different ships in different directions depending on how their sails are set. The law of autosuggestion will lift you up or pull you down according to the way you set your sails of thought.
And the poem quoted right at the end powerfully reinforces this central theme, doesn't it? If you think you are beaten, you are. It's all in the state of mind. The man who wins is the man who thinks he can. Belief comes first.
Okay, so to ground these, let's say, pretty big concepts, the source material provides some historical examples. Not just of abstract faith, but of how this mechanism thought, mixed with conviction and transmitted, might influence reality on a really large scale.
Right. And the editor makes a point to clarify that when the text discusses figures like, say, Jesus Christ, the focus isn't on endorsing religious dogma per se, it's on their personal faith.
How is it defined here?
As absolute trust in his beliefs and total conviction and confidence in his cause. These are presented as powerful examples of a thought impulse mixed with faith, manifesting results viewed just through the lens of this principle.
So Jesus is cited as an example of the sheer power of faith, with the text stating the basis of Christianity itself is faith, and that his achievements, or what some call miracles, were nothing more nor less than faith.
It goes on to say that miracles, if they occur, are produced through the state of mind known as faith. It's attributing the result to the mental state.
Okay. And then there's Mahatma Gandhi. He's called one of the most astounding examples of the possibilities of faith.
Yeah, the text makes a strong claim that he wielded more potential power than any man living in his time, despite having absolutely none of the, orthodox tools of power, money, battleships, soldiers, weapons.
None of the usual stuff. So how did he achieve that incredible influence, according to this source? How did he wield that power?
It says he created this power out of his understanding of the principle of faith and through his ability to transplant that faith into the minds of 200 million people.
Transplant faith.
He didn't command them with force. He influenced them to coalesce and move in unison as a single mind, primarily through the power of his own unshakable belief and his ability to communicate and transmit that belief.
Wow.
The text then poses the rhetorical question, what other force on earth except faith could do as much? It's presented as this monumental illustration of belief driving mass action, completely outside traditional power structures.
That's powerful. Okay, moving from personal conviction and political influence to the world of big business, the deep dive offers a really major illustration. The formation of the United States Steel Corporation back in 1900.
Yeah, and the editor notes the story isn't solely about faith, obviously. Many complex factors were involved, but argues that faith is at the center of it. Specifically, the key figure, Charles M. Schwab, according to the source, mixed his big idea with absolute unwavering faith that he could pull it off.
And this story involves some real titans, right? Andrew Carnegie, the dominant force in steel.
The Steel King, yeah.
Schwab, who was Carnegie's highly capable right-hand man. And J.P. Morgan, the incredibly powerful Wall Street financier.
Exactly. The context was that Carnegie controlled a huge chunk of U.S. steel production, maybe 25%, and he was driving down prices dramatically through vertical integration, modern methods, just relentless efficiency.
Making it tough for competitors.
Extremely tough. Smaller competitors couldn't keep up, so they went to J.P. Morgan for help. Morgan was financing these things called trusts or combinations, basically trying to consolidate power, create near monopolies, even though they were technically illegal, to try and compete with Carnegie.
And Carnegie's reaction to this, not exactly backing down, I imagine.
Not at all. He planned to retaliate massively by building his own manufacturing plants to compete directly with the very companies Morgan had allied. And Schwab was his chief and able lieutenant in executing this aggressive plan.
So the stage was set for a huge industrial battle.
Absolutely. And the pivotal moment described in the text is a dinner, December 12, 1900. Schwab was invited to speak to a group of Eastern bankers, including Morgan. His hosts apparently warned him to keep it brief, knowing these financiers valued conciseness.
But Schwab didn't keep it brief.
Not even close. He gave what the text calls a galvanic 90-minute speech instead.
90 minutes. What on earth did he talk about that held their attention?
He laid out this incredibly visionary plan for the future of the entire steel industry. He talked about efficiency through specialization, merging plants to get huge economies of scale, capturing foreign markets. He actually condemned the short-sighted piracy of competitors restricting the market.
So, a big vision. But what was the really key part?
Crucially, he argued for lowering the cost of steel, not just raising prices through monopoly. He envisioned creating an ever-expanding market by making steel cheaper and more accessible, essentially articulating modern mass production concepts way before they were widespread.
Okay, interesting vision. But what did Morgan, the master dealmaker, hear in all of this? What was the subtext for him?
Well, Morgan heard more than just an efficient business plan. He heard the distinct, unspoken implication that the vast, powerful Carnegie enterprise might actually be brought into the kind of combination he was trying to build. Schwab's presentation strongly suggested that Carnegie might be open to selling rather than engaging in a mutually destructive price war. And that possibility solved Morgan's single biggest problem, how to deal with Carnegie.
So the negotiations started almost immediately after that.
Very quickly. About a week later, Morgan sought out Schwab, apparently through some secret meetings. Schwab came prepared. He brought 6 sheets of handwritten figures detailing his valuation of all the necessary steel companies to make this grand consolidation work.
And Morgan trusted Schwab's numbers.
Completely. Morgan and his associates apparently reviewed those figures all night long, and the text states Schwab's valuations were totally unquestioned. They trusted his expertise and, presumably, his integrity.
Okay, so the numbers worked. Then what?
Then, at dawn, Morgan asked the absolute critical question, the one that hinged entirely on Schwab's personal influence and belief. Do you think you can persuade Andrew Carnegie to sell?
Wow. All eyes on Schwab. What did he say?
He simply said he'd try. And Morgan, trusting Schwab's confidence, replied, "If you can get him to sell, I will undertake the matter." The deal depended on Schwab's ability to convince Carnegie.
That's immense pressure.
Yeah.
And convincing Carnegie, the notoriously independent, self-made man, to sell his empire, that must have seemed almost impossible. How did Schwab do it?
The story goes he approached Carnegie during a casual game of golf. Afterwards, using the same persuasive power, the same vision he'd used in his speech, he laid out the benefits for Carnegie retirement, immense wealth, legacy.
And Carnegie actually agreed.
Astonishingly, yes. Carnegie capitulated. He named his price around $400 million, a truly staggering sum back then. Apparently, it was significantly higher than Schwab's initial valuation.
But Morgan paid it.
He did. Morgan later commented he would have paid even more if Schwab had asked for it. He wanted the deal that badly.
Incredible. And the result was the formation of U.S. Steel, consolidating all these vast properties.
Yes. And the text highlights something remarkable. The appraised value of these acquired properties apparently increased in value by an estimated $600 million, which would be like $12 billion today, almost overnight.
Just from the act of consolidation.
Simply due to putting them all under one efficient management structure and eliminating that destructive competition, the potential was unlocked.
So the source concludes this whole saga by saying that Charles M. Schwab's idea, plus the faith with which he conveyed it to the minds of J.P. Morgan and the others, was marketed for a profit of approximately $600 million.
Right. It boils it down, stating the real ingredients weren't just assets and numbers, but Schwab's faith, his desire, his imagination, his persistence. Those intangible mental qualities were key.
Okay, so after this whole deep dive, what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've explored this really compelling idea presented in the source material that maybe, just maybe, your mind's limitations are largely self-imposed, a result of the thoughts you allow to dominate.
Yeah, we've dug into how faith defined here, not as, religious belief necessarily, but as that unwavering conviction in your own ability is presented not just as some passive feeling, but as a state of mind you can actively, consciously cultivate and build.
And we've seen how autosuggestion, the deliberate, emotionalized repetition of thoughts and instructions aimed at your subconscious mind, is proposed as the key method, the how-to, for developing that necessary faith.
And critically, how the subconscious, which the text says takes everything literally and without judgment, apparently translates any strong emotionalized thought impulse, whether it's positive or negative, into your actual reality.
From something really personal and practical, like that self-confidence formula designed to overcome internal limitations.
All the way up to the massive scale of the U.S. Steel formation, where one person's idea, mixed with unshakable faith, influenced titans of industry and literally reshaped an entire sector.
The source material definitely makes a powerful case for the practical consequences of directed thought and deeply held belief.
Right.
It's not just philosophy.
Right. This deep dive really suggests that understanding how this principle of autosuggestion supposedly works, and then consciously choosing the thoughts you focus on, the ones you emotionalize and repeat, well, it isn't just an interesting intellectual exercise.
Why not?
It's presented as absolutely fundamental because, like that analogy of the wind and the sails, this law of autosuggestion will lift you up or pull you down according to the way you set your sails of thought. It dictates your direction.
So maybe think about this after our dive today. If, as this source strongly suggests, the subconscious mind cannot distinguish between what is real and what is vividly imagined.
And if it takes any emotionalized thought impulse and begins translating it into its physical equivalent, then what are the most dominating thoughts you are currently allowing to occupy your mind day in and day out?
And maybe more importantly, are they steering you towards the life you truly desire, or are they unintentionally pulling you somewhere else entirely? Something to consider.